Hello dear listeners, welcome back to Timeless Romance Tales, where danger arrives by moonlight, strangers keep the kind of secrets that burn, and love often finds you at the moment you are most broken. Before we begin, don't forget to like this video and subscribe so you never miss another tale of ruin, rescue, and the kind of ardor that refuses to be polite. Now tonight's story begins with a manor in flames, a desperate flight, and the lord everyone in the county feared, who would become the only man brave enough to catch her. Let's begin. The sky over Halbridge Manor was the color of soot by the time Clara Winthrop realized the house was burning. She had been asleep when the first smell reached her, that horrible cloying tang of smoke that slips under doors and folds itself into your hair. At first she thought it was a nightmare. The curtains twisting like living things, servants' shouts like distant thunder. Then the floor trembled and a shout, sharp and frantic, pulled her out of bed. She stumbled, bare feet on cold boards, and saw the hall beyond the door winking with orange. Fire! Wake! Wake! Someone screamed. Clara dressed with fingers that shook. She had not been brave that evening. She had been idle, trapped in the long soft misery of an arranged engagement she could not bear. She'd sat through music and made small smiles while Lord Pembroke's guests admired the draperies. She had no plan beyond living out her days as a well-arranged bride. Tonight the heavens rearranged her plans. "Madam!" gasped Edith, the maid, eyes rimmed red with smoke. "The West Wing, Lord Pembroke's study, has caught." Clara's heart lurched. "My father." He was away at his club, rumored to stay for the races. She did not know. She only knew the stair she took 3 times a day was now a ladder of flame. They fled into the gardens where the night air slapped their faces like water. Halbridge's ancient oaks glowed as if lit from within. Guests stumbled from small doors, gowns torn or trailing. Lanterns bobbed like fireflies. Voices collided with the crackle of timber. Someone shrieked. "The stables, Miss Winthrop's pony." Clara moved as if underwater, choking on smoke and scent of burning hair. She heard the clatter of horses in the lamplight, a terrible bright chaos. People pressed around the service gate. She turned and the world was a smear of moving bodies, a man in a dark coat carrying a wrapped bundle, another with his face blackened dragging a child. She should have been thinking of her family, of the portrait of her mother, of the envelope stacked on the dressing table with the solicitor's neat hand. Instead she heard a voice, low, controlled, cutting the tumult like a sword. "Stand back. Clear a path." The voice was not like the others, commanding not with clutching panic but with an expectation that people obey. Lantern light found a broad figure and for a breath Clara thought of a carved statue come to life. He wore a riding coat with a collar turned against the smoke. His hair was dark, damp at the temples from sweat or rain. His face was angular and pale, jaw set like flint. People turned when he passed, as if the world recognized him and made way. Lord Sebastian Crowne of Blackwell. Whispered rumors had given him nicknames. Blackwell. The Wolf of Blackwell. A man who buried enemies and married advantage. Children were told not to stare. Mothers said his name to frighten miscreants. He had a reputation as a brooding, implacable lord who dealt harshly with trespassers and debtors alike. He was not a man who smiled at brides at parties. Yet the man now strode through the garden with a lantern and a rope and a purpose. He reached the stable and barked. "Tie that wheel to the post quickly. Someone to the south gate. Smoke's worse there." A servant froze. Sebastian looked at him, cold and exact, and the servant moved like a puppet freed. Clara had never seen him up close. Society supplies faces to legends, but truth is smaller and more human. Up close the lord looked like a man who had learned how to keep pain at bay with precision. When his eyes fell on her they were merciless, not cruel, merely assessing. He advanced, every man making room. "You there," he said to Clara, and she recognized the authority of a man who has given orders all his life. "Can you ride?" "Ride," she echoed. Her voice sounded thin. "The cart by the west gate, can you mount it? It will take you away from the smoke." "Ah, yes." She found a steadiness in the obedience of animals. The steward had thrown her a cloak and hands were upon her, but the world narrowed to his voice and the heat at her back. He unwrapped a bundle that proved to be a child, no older than 3, coughing but conscious. He passed the child to a woman and then, without fanfare, offered her his arm. "Lady Winthrop." His English was clipped. This way. She wanted to refuse. She wanted to flounce like the heroines in the novels, elegant and indignant. There was no time for such things. He led her to a coach and she saw, by the way he held his shoulders, that even he felt the weight of what was happening. There was no pretense of gallantry in his gait. He looked like a man running a war, not a man rescuing a lady. The carriage jolted through the lane and they rode with the glow of Halbridge behind them as if watching a dying constellation. Ashen sparks blew past the open windows. Clara could not think of the man who had proposed, nor the solicitor's letter, nor even the scent of her mother's lavender. All that existed was the raw, elemental terror of smoke, and a man who did not flinch at it. When the coach slowed at Blackwell Hall, Sebastian helped her down with an efficiency that felt like a kindness. The hall glowed warmly, as if the walls themselves sighed in relief to be safe. He had summoned staff and an army of servants by the time they reached the great hall. They made tea and wrapped blankets around trembling shoulders. Clara sat on a long settee like a figure in a damp dream. "You're safe here," Sebastian said. He took no liberties with comfort. He offered it in a flat, deliberate way. "Until the county decides Halbridge." Why are you helping us?" she asked. It sounded foolish even as she asked. He was a lord with enemies. People suspected him of cruelty, not charity. "Because it is my duty," he said. "Blackwell shares a border with Halbridge. What affects the one affects the other. And because I will not see innocents burn without hands to help fetch them out." His voice had no invitation in it, yet the words landed like a plausible truth. She noticed, despite herself, how precise his hands were when he wrapped an extra blanket around her shoulders. They were not the tentative touch of a lover. They were the insistence of a man who had learned to measure and fix. She slept badly that night on a narrow pallet beneath a quilt that smelled of wood smoke and citrus. In the morning the servants murmured about how the crowd had called the fire Halbridge's misfortune and a loss. There would be insurance and solicitor letters and a column in the Gazette. But there were also questions. How had the fire begun? A defective hearth? Sabotage? Insurance fraud? Rumor as tinder. The county's tongues licked with interest. Clara presented herself with the pallor of a woman who'd seen flames. She wanted only to leave and lull herself back into the life that had been set like a neat plan around her. Wedding, dowry, compliance. But Halbridge's ruin had unstitched something in her. She felt untethered, raw and acutely alive in the spaces between decisions. Blackwell Hall was a blunt fortress. Its corridors smelled of smoke-scented blankets and mopped floors. Lord Sebastian moved through them with the gait of a man always a half-step ahead. He did not smile. He observed. He listened. On the second day after the fire, a neighbor arrived, Colonel Ashbury, tart and officious, who had a face that suggested he thought the war ought to continue forever. He spoke to Sebastian in a low tone that carried across the room. "It was deliberate," the colonel said. "Halbridge has enemies. There's talk the match between Winthrop and Pembroke put money in wrong hands. Someone may have thought to silence the line." Sebastian's expression did not change. "We will let the coroner speak. But Lady Winthrop must give her statement." The colonel turned a glance at Clara like a man about to measure fabric. "We need a woman's description. Someone who was present." Clara felt the color drain. "I would like to return to Halbridge," she managed. "There's nothing for me here." "That is impossible," Colonel Ashbury said flatly. "The manor is under investigation." Sebastian's gaze took her in. "Lady Winthrop," he said, quieter than the colonel, "your presence complicates matters." "How?" Her voice cracked. "You saw people leave the wing," the colonel said. "You may have seen who moved about late." "I saw nothing," she whispered. "You did," the colonel insisted. "You will be needed." Sebastian stepped closer. The air between them seemed to tighten as if in a varnished room. "If you are needed," he said, "you will be protected while you assist. If not, you will be under my roof until this is settled." Clara's throat closed on the words. His offer sounded like shelter. It sounded also in a tone she could not name like possession. The county whispered that he did not give shelter without price. There had been rumors about women who stayed at Blackwell and found lives altered in ways no one would have predicted. "Why help me?" she asked again. Because honesty was small comfort in the face of so many unspoken things. Because you begged and because Halbridge is home to neighbors and kin of mine, Sebastian said. Because sometimes the only decent thing a man can do is keep animals and children from burning. His answer was an odd mixture of moral rectitude and a man who had thought through the logistics of kindness. He was not sentimental. He didn't offer the flutter of romance. He offered steadiness, and it felt astonishingly like safety. Days blurred into a routine. She gave statements, spoke with constables, and found that being questioned by men in sober coats hardened her in a way she did not expect. Sebastian sat in on the interviews, always near enough that his presence steadied her like a stone in a rushing stream. When the county's talk turned sour, was Pembroke's rivalry to blame? Had Halbridge insured too generously? He took a crisp step between rumor and her. One evening, as a winter rain smudged the stonework, Clara found Sebastian standing alone in the library. He leaned against a shelf, hands folded, a letter unopened on the table. "Why did you not leave me to the magistrates?" she asked, feeling her courage hot as embers. He looked at her as if surprised by the blunt question, then gave a small, almost hidden smile. "I am not cruel, Lady Winthrop. Cruelty is a poor long-term strategy." She had expected outrage, philosophy, some gloved defense of domestic virtue. His reply was oddly domestic. "But why help someone you do not know?" she pressed. "Because in the ruins of Halbridge I saw a child with soot in her hair and a woman cradling a portrait," he answered. "Those pictures lingered. You looked like someone who would never rebuild, and that is intolerable to me. I prefer people who don't give up." "You gave me shelter," she said, "and I'm supposed to thank you." "You may do as you wish," Sebastian said. There was a gentleness to his voice now that surprised her. The reputation of the man everyone feared dulled in the glow of this strange private care. The truth is, days wrap themselves like ribbons. Clara began to notice small brave things. He would appear with her tea before she finished her sentence. He would tense when the coroner's questions turned to motive. He would step into a room, demand silence, and the men would obey as if a blade rested on their necks. There were times when she caught him standing outside her door long after he had left, simply watching her sleep. There was no fondness to it that she recognized from novels. It was more like a man waiting for a debt to clear from his mind. And then one night he took her hand. Not with the bluster of a gentleman seizing a prize, not with the ceremonial touches of an engagement. He took it in silence, and the pressure of his fingers said more than a letter could. He did not kneel. He did not promise her a future in the language of parlors and contracts. He said instead, in a voice low as thunder, "If anyone threatens you, I will make their lives unnecessary." She could not meet his eyes for the flood of something hot and dangerous rising in her chest. "You frighten me," she admitted. "So you should," he murmured. "Because I am a man who keeps his promises." His hand closed around hers like an oath. And when she looked up, really looked, she saw beneath that fearsome facade a man who had learned how to protect the fragile without being sentimental. A man who had been feared because he would do what was required, not because he enjoyed cruelty. When Halbridge was finally declared an accident after the coroner found a faulty flue, the sort of conclusion papers like "because the living prefer to burn with convenient reasons," the county breathed. People returned to their routines. But Clara had already been changed. Where once she had been a woman passively arranged like a lampshade, she now had a memory of being pulled from an inferno by a man whose hands were rough and certain. She had a man who would not let gossip chew at her like hungry hounds. The season moved on. Calls were made, condolences issued, a small trust set up for the Winthrops. Offerings were made as would befit a lady of damaged household. Lord Pembroke's suit lingered like a shadow. He wrote one letter, then another, but Clara did not return them. She had learned the sweetness of refusal, the dangerous, quiet pride of telling the world no. She stayed at Blackwell because it was safer. She stayed because Sebastian was there. She stayed because in the nightly hush of the great hall, she had come to learn that the man everyone feared could be relied upon to step into fire for the sake of another. Months later, in the scent of repaired books and fresh-cut roses, he asked her to walk with him along the downs that rolled away from his hall. The wind tugged at her hair and he placed his gloved hand in the small of her back, guiding without pressure. "You could leave," he said suddenly.